to come up on Lafayette Cemetery. You can kind of see it above all of the cars. It's a big stone thing right over there.
Now this tomb right here is the most expensive tomb in the cemetery. Most people spend somewhere between 13 and 25 grand on their tombs, but this one is made out of granite, has a statue on top, marble steps leading up to it, and a cast iron fence around it. Like real estate for the dead, all the materials do depend on the cost. None of this is free. Factor in the cost of labor. According to today's currency, this tomb is worth $200,000. Now, if they wanted to sell their, people wanted to sell their tomb, it's actually not illegal.
I'm good with cremation. I'm good.
Available for sale on Craigslist before. But by law, you got to remove the remains because they need to be signed in remains, which is illegal. There are loopholes though. Semantics matter. You're not buying the tomb, you're adopting it. It's like how buying versus adopting your kid connotates they're very different things. It's in the ground. We can, and we do, bury in the ground. We buried in the ground for 90 years before we even started to do above ground burials. Never said caskets don't pop up though. It's just not because of the water table. 2011, Hurricane Irene, 50 caskets popped to the surface in Vermont. It can happen anywhere.
Great ideas.
$6,000 to $8,000 to build. It's $400 to reuse. Now this is as opposed to the 13 to 25 grand to build and roughly about $100 to $200 to reuse. So it's about whether or not do you have 13 to 25 grand, you know, just lying around. Maybe you have somewhere like 6,000 to 8,000. So you might do this process instead. The idea by buying 2 plots of land, you can utilize your dirt space better. The casket's going to go in the center. You give the body 5 years to decompose. After 5 years, you can do the same procedure as before with these above ground tombs. But this time, that bag of remains goes in the corner, and then you just go around your perimeter with your bags of bones, and then suddenly, they're inside the center is a normal sized plot that you can continue to use for funerals. This utilizes your dirt space a little bit more efficiently than just one person per plot.
So what do they do with the coffins? If they're burying everybody in a coffin, letting them decompose, and then bringing it back up?
Burying them in a casket.
Okay.
Not a coffin. So most
right.
coffins actually are not allowed for these above ground tombs especially. They're too big. Coffins, because they're so wide up on the top and then they come narrow down and they usually have these huge handles on it, they don't actually fit inside of these above ground tombs, whereas opposed to caskets are simple rectangular in shape, so they're much more easy to slide into these tombs. Sometimes coffins get used on the in-ground plots, but not usually. But a lot of times our caskets are a little different than traditional caskets you could even imagine up north, simply because they have to be much smaller than most caskets.
So they get rid of them or they...
This is dirt cheap and the origins are Jewish. They have rules when it comes to handling the dead. You gotta bury in the ground within 24 hours of death using an all wooden casket that had to have been made by hand. You cannot move the body once the final resting place has been made. So traditionally they do 1 person per plot, but there has been many instances throughout history where they didn't have much of a choice. For our historic context, we have had 2 very large waves of Jewish immigration here in New Orleans. First one was in the 1870s. They were from Prague. We weren't ready. Before 1803, we were a French-speaking Catholic colony. That type of culture doesn't just disappear overnight. People were burning mosques, synagogues, temples, looking for religious graves that weren't displaying the cross, and actually vandalizing those graves in question. It was a very dark time in our history. To this day, we still experience religious discrimination in New Orleans. Last Passover, someone vandalized a Jewish grave. Someone not only dug into the grave, they scattered this Jewish person's bones all throughout the cemetery. It was really bad what happened. Knowing that, World War II culture was a little different. There was a huge culture centered around the war efforts, and one of them was, don't be a Nazi. We should bring that culture back, by the way. Don't be a Nazi. It's not cool. But at the time, it was a cultural thing for the war efforts to not be one. So because of that culture, people were listening. Then they found out how cheap it was, and that's when it skyrocketed in popularity, and suddenly non-Jewish communities are doing a Jewish custom. Standard depth of 6 feet below, the border you see is extra dirt space. Casket goes at the bottom, dirt goes on top. At the next funeral, you remove any casket without touching the corpse. Very specific to their beliefs. Now put some dirt over the body. No one must see Aunt Esther during the funeral, right? And then the next casket goes right on top. So that way you can stack your bodies, one on top of another. As time goes on, your bodies on the top are heavier and less decomposed than the ones at the bottom. So it just naturally crushes the remains and sinks it farther in the earth. Because it's nature doing it, not them, it's okay. It's a loophole. The border also keeps the bodies from spilling off the sides, and there is nothing in the rules that say we can't like build up and have like Jewish burial skyscrapers one day. It's just cheaper to start over with a new plot of land. Or 20 years old, 15, teenager, or you live to 70. There was like never really an in-between. And that's honestly because once your immune system is developed to fight off diseases, it's easier. But here's the thing, are you going to survive those diseases? Highly unlikely.
A lot of bad ones back then, too.
Huh?
A lot of bad ones back then.
Yeah. Now we have this amazing thing called vaccines, which allow us to not even really need to fight off these diseases.
Too bad we got all the anti.
What's some of the very first vaccinations?
Oh yeah, I mean it's just common sense. You know,
Right.
Hard to believe some people are against that.
Now theoretically, if you ensure you're never around diseases in the first place,